The Paladin class is probably the most controversial of the bunch. Some people don't like how their mechanics are, saying they're too powerful. Others don't like how the oath plays out in the role-playing sections. In the latter case, there are obvious pitfalls that a lot of players seem to fall into. Today I'm going to talk about how to avoid those pitfalls. Once again, this is a 5th edition video. The role-playing aspect can really apply to any TTRPG with Paladins, but if I talk about the mechanics, I'm referring to 5e specifically. The first big thing that some players might have a hard time with is how Paladins are described in the player's handbook. If you read it in a literal sense, they're described as strictly bastions against evil. The truth is, you don't need to create a good Paladin. Evil Paladins are more than viable, and same with neutral Paladins. If you're familiar with Joe Manganiello's character, Archon the Cruel, you'll understand. He's an Oathbreaker to Tiamat. The Oathbreaker in of itself sets up for a lot of great things, and I'll come back to it later. If you want to create an evil paladin, you simply have to pick an evil deity. You want to be neutral? Pick a neutral deity. The player's handbook describes paladins as good simply for conventional purposes, in my opinion. Keep in mind that the player's handbook doesn't run the game, the dungeon master does. So check with your DM if this is what you're looking to do. If you are the DM in the situation, I think you should allow it. It's a way to keep things fresh and will make the player far less likely to fall into lawful stupid territory. Which brings me to my next point of lawful and chaotic stupid paladins. Players can tend to fall into the trap of, this is my oath, therefore I must supersede everything else to satisfy that oath. There are countless stories from Reddit that drive this point home. My god hates goblins, so I must kill every goblin I see, where the party is trying to interrogate or spare the goblin. Look, deities aren't all absolute about everything. Talk to your DM about your chosen deity. If it turns out that yes, your chosen god is absolute about killing every goblin you see, then your party needs to know that up front, with the DM backing you up. When I say the party though, I mean the players, before your first game. You need to make sure the players are okay with it before you start playing. I think this brings up the crux of character creation that I think can be applied to any class. We all know about the Session 0 by now, right? I mentioned it in a previous video. The Session 0 is important, but I think you can take it a step further depending on your character. If you want to play a rigid, humorless paladin, I'm not saying you can't. But if your character has some extreme characteristics, you need to have the foresight to talk to your fellow players about it. To me, that's the best thing you can do. 1. If they reject the character, then you can avoid a potential problem in-game. 2. If they approve, they can't complain when you follow your character traits and slaughter every goblin in sight. Maybe your particular party likes that kind of character. So be it. This definitely doesn't just apply to Paladin. Don't be afraid to get feedback from your peers. In return, if your friend has a say in how you create your character, you can offer your own insight to theirs. Before my next big campaign, there's going to be a lot more discussion on the characters and what the players want, much more than last time. I'll tell you guys about my paladin that I've played a little bit of in another game that I don't DM. Maybe it can help you find a good balance with your character that maybe you wanted to play. The Dark Souls character you see on screen is based off the D&D character I made, Enduil Eldar. He's a high elf who was raised in a sect of religion that was more grim and rigid. He was forced to be celibate until marriage, once he would become 150 years old. It was an arranged marriage situation as well. That never happened though, because a large host of bandits took out his area when he was roughly 100 or so, and he was left behind. Some things happened that I won't get into, but N was allowed to join this bandit group. There, he found the joys of sex and became a bit of a deviant because he was repressed for 100 or so years. He was a bandit for a while until his company challenged a temple of a life goddess. The temple slaughtered the majority of the bandits and gave the convert or die command that religions often did back in the old days. N was the only one who was able to properly convert, as he was the only one with a religious background. Now, this temple is something I created along with my backstory. This temple is a certain sect of this life goddess that serves life in one particular way: procreation, the creation and preservation of life. Enduil fell in love with this particular way of life and over time became a paladin. For most of his training, he shirked the fighting part and mostly looked to procreate. If someone comes up to him and tells him that he is their father, his line is, "You probably aren't the first, definitely won't be the last." We began the campaign at level 1 not long after his order essentially chastised him for ignoring the fighting part of being a paladin and only traveling around to make children. That's kinda how I justified him having been in the order for around 20 or so years without being higher level, but it also made sense for the character. He was probably a low-level rogue at one point that lost all his levels over those decades of not doing any sort of fighting. As far as personality goes, N is very chill for the most part. He's pretty supportive of the people he likes. Of course, he is flirty, but I decided to dial it back to make it a little less, I don't know, cliche? The pervy priest or pervy monk archetype has been done a lot of times, and so I tried to make it a little bit more tempered over time. He does believe in justice over fairness. In other words, if a wicked person is wronged, he's generally okay with it, which is where he kind of fits somewhere between lawful and neutral good. He'll also treat wrongdoing more harshly if it's inflicted on an attractive woman. I put in his character sheet that he isn't a fan of over-punishing someone, which I think I kept to. Again, being conscious of not falling off the handle to a degree that may do more harm than good to the overall narrative. To me, N is a fun character that doesn't go too far on any extreme, but he has enough strong traits to play off of. I could have made him in a way that goes, "Oh, new town, who do I fuck first?" But that would just devalue him and derail the campaign to an unnecessary point. I think that's the big thing when you're in character creation. When you're building defined traits, think of them in the context of an adventure. Is this going to cause problems for the party? Is this going to slow the game to a crawl every time I feel I need to do or say this? Maybe I'll do a full video on character creation and my thoughts on it. I'm straying a little off topic here. The Oathbreaker is a great tool to use. If you want to be an evil paladin, you don't necessarily need to pick an evil god right away. You can be a paladin to a good deity and betray that oath in favor of another. The description given of "only darkness remains" is pretty nuts. You can even be an Oathbreaker and work on the side of the good people so long as you get your evil motives fulfilled. I think the point that I'm driving here is that while your paladins can be rigid, they don't necessarily have to be. A class is only as interesting as the player behind it. You can be playing a bard, which is supposed to be dramatic and exciting, but if your character is written like a wooden plank and you play the game like one, then you're no better at being creative than the overzealous paladin. Now, I have to say it, Paladin is my favorite class in the game. I'm a big fan of the way they fight, mixing melee combat with raw divine power. I love that their bodies become immune to disease and always exude these auras of power, like aura of protection. Mechanically, they can be so gratifying to play when you deal a boatload of damage in one round, but it's balanced out by your resource pool not being quite so heavy, and also the smite damage cap. I mentioned it in a previous video about balance, so I'm not going to go into that anymore here. Paladins are verified badasses by design, so if you can make it interesting for yourself and for the rest of the people at the table, you've won D&D, man. Everyone is going to have a great time playing with you, and you can be useful in and out of combat. But I think that's enough for today. Let me know what you think. Do you like Paladins? Why or why not? Have you played one? What were the results? Let me know. But like always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Before my next big campaign, there's going to be a lot more discussion on the characters and what the players want. Much more than last time. Fuck me.